The RTX 5070 is finally here, and is this the cure for the commonly cold reception of the RTX 50 series? Does it close the frame rate gap between the RTX 4090 high rollers and the commoners? Well, we're going to tell you all about that right here, right now on Robeytech, after a word from our sponsor. With the new NVIDIA RTX 50 series GPUs landing, Falcon Northwest has custom PCs for just about every occasion. Need a powerful desktop? Check out the Talon. How about something more portable? The Tiki is your destination. What about a grab-and-go workstation? The Fragbox can handle that. It even has a handle. And for home theaters, they have the Rack. Each Falcon Northwest system has tons of customization options for your needs. And if you want some peace of mind to go with your PC, each Falcon Northwest system is rigorously tested, they have in-house tech support, and every system comes with 1 year of their Falcon overnight service to ensure your downtime is as low as possible. So for more information or to order one of these PCs for yourself, head on over to falcon-nw.com today. After nearly 2 months of waiting, speculating, and trying to read the 50 series tea leaves, we finally have our hands on the NVIDIA RTX 5070 Founders Edition, the allegedly $549 GPU that will supposedly bring RTX 4090 levels of gaming performance to the masses, along with a whole list of qualifying footnotes. That being said, we're going to tell you a bit about what we saw with the RTX 5070 right up front. No, the RTX 5070 does not pull off better raw performance than the RTX 4090. However, that isn't its intent. In the instances where multi-frame generation is available, the RTX 5070 is capable of besting the previous generation's juggernaut, which is a neat party trick for a GPU that cost a fraction of the retail price. We also saw 1440p performance that does make this GPU a great value for some people. So how much of a lead does the RTX 5070 take versus the 4090, and how does it perform overall? Well, stick around because you might be surprised. But before we get there, we need to do two things. Thing number one is to say thank you to NVIDIA for sending us an RTX 5070 Founders Edition for review. So we want to express our gratitude to them and be transparent with you where the GPU actually came from. And thing number two, before we get into the numbers, we need to give the same disclaimer we've been giving throughout the 50 series launch and future CPU and GPU launches. All the numbers you're about to see are not concrete numbers, and they represent a small sample set. These drivers that we use to test the RTX 5070 are pre-release drivers. As always, we do our part to validate that the data is as sound as possible before it gets to you, but understand that something as simple as a driver update or a game patch can shift results or help us discover some oddities. Another reminder here, we are using test benches powered by the Intel Core Ultra 9285K. We didn't have the 9800X 3Ds we needed. We wanted to make sure that we tested on something that was ultra fast, and we've shared some of the quirks we've discovered along the way with this, and we've seen some of those things fixed with game updates while others are still pending. That being said, the test data you'll see in our video is going to look different from data gathered using platforms powered by the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D or the Core i9 14900K. So with the housekeeping done, here is what we're going to be looking at today. For data comparisons, we're going to be using the Founders Edition RTX 5070 and 4070 Super, as well as the ASRock Steel Legend Radeon RX 7800 XT. We'll be looking at 1080p and 1440p raw data first, and then adding in DLSS and FSR, followed by frame generation and multi-frame generation. When we look at frame generation, we're only going to be using the 5070's multi-frame generation at 2 times to match the best the 4070 Super and the 7800 XT can offer. But don't worry, we're going to compare the 5070 with the 4090 after all of this, and yes, we'll be using multi-frame generation to its fullest extent to tell that story. Now with all that in mind, let's get to the data. Starting with the raw performance at 1080p, the RTX 5070 showed an average overall uplift of around 2.5% over the 4070 Super. That being said, we saw places where the 5070's performance uplift was as low as 1.8% in games like Marvel Rivals, but then places where it was nearly 12% in games like Forza Horizon 5. However, much like we saw with the 5070 Ti, the 5070 struggled to take the high ground in Space Marine 2, Hogwarts Legacy, and Starfield. Moving on to 1440p, we saw the RTX 5070 close some of the performance gaps between it and the 4070 Super with an overall average uplift of 5.4%. This ranged from a 1.1% performance uplift in Marvel Rivals to 18% in Cyberpunk 2077. Though to be fair, 1.1% represents less than 1 frame per second, so it's kind of a moot point here. Now we do start to see some cracks in the 5070's armor here at 1440p, but that's a conversation we're going to talk about when we get to multi-frame generation. Now when we start adding in upscaling, we have a bit of a shift. With the addition of DLSS and more ray tracing elements, the RTX 5070 loses the ground it gained, most notably in Cyberpunk, Space Marine, and Hogwarts when compared to the RTX 4070 Super. It is possible that we're seeing some issues between the test drivers and the games here, so we're going to file this story's outcome as yet to be determined for the time being. Now we have absolutely been talking to NVIDIA and we're trying to get to the bottom of what's going on, but we weren't quite able to get the answers in time for us to record this video. Now when we add DLSS frame generation and AMD's fluid motion frames to our upscaling test, the RTX 5070 gains control of its position. Here we see the RTX 5070 take around a 5% overall average lead over the 4070 Super. Here we see a 3.4% lead in Starfield and a 3.7% lead in Space Marine 2 over the RTX 4070 Super's performance. Both titles that the RTX 4070 Super had a hold on, at least up until this point. However, in Cyberpunk, Hogwarts, and Indiana Jones, the difference was within 1 to 3 frames per second average, so they're kind of a wash. Now, as for the comparison with AMD, in the titles we tested, 3 of them did not support AMD's fluid motion frames. Even so, the 5070 bested the 7800 XT in every title they competed in, except for Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. Keep in mind, these numbers showed the 5070 only running at 2 times frame generation to match the 4070 Super and the RX 7800 XT. So the 5070 was essentially fighting with one hand tied behind its back. Now, if you watched a review of the RTX 5070 Ti, you might remember the threshold, or the "you must be this tall to ride this ride" bar for multi-frame generation. Ideally, you're looking at as close to 60 frames per second or higher with DLSS in order to use multi-frame generation. And this is where the comparison could get tricky and where we see the whole cracks in the armor thing we talked about earlier. When we look at raw performance numbers without ray tracing, sure, the 5070 is hitting those marks in most cases, but when we start adding in ray tracing, we have a couple of games where the 5070 only hovers around 60 frames per second with DLSS enabled. This isn't the GPU that's going to allow you to crank every feature up to 11. You're going to have to go back and pick what's important to you to make sure that you hit above that threshold, something that didn't exist on the 5070 Ti, and then 5080 and up seems to not have an issue. So with that in mind, what does the data say? So we're going to treat this with some heavy caveats here, so consider what we're about to say as a bit of sugar before we give you the medicine. So for starters, when we look at the data we were able to gather at 1440p, it looks like NVIDIA was not exaggerating here. In Alan Wake 2, the 5070 took a nearly 7.7% lead over the 4090 with an average of 194 frames per second. In Cyberpunk 2077, the 5070's lead was over 8.7% with an average frame rate just under 245 frames. In Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, we saw the smallest lead of 4.4% with an average frame rate of 280 frames per second. And finally, in Marvel Rivals, the RTX 5070 took a massive 14.6% lead over the 4090 with a frame rate of 308.5 frames per second. Now keep in mind, that is a very small sample set, so take this more as a first look than a full answer to the question. But for now, it really does look like with multi-frame generation that the RTX 5070 can reach RTX 4090 levels of performance, which feels weird to say, but we're definitely here for more people experiencing higher frame rates. That statement sounds really, really positive, but now it's time for the medicine. The 4090 levels of performance is only possible with DLSS 4, only with multi-frame generation, and only if your game is averaging higher than 60 frames per second with DLSS before turning any of this stuff on. This is not raw performance, and you have to decide if you're okay with that. By the general response of the very loud portion of the internet, at least a few of you aren't. Now, was Jensen wrong in saying the 5070 delivered 4090 performance at 549? Not entirely, but that statement was just a bit too broad, and it comes with a whole heap of caveats. But ultimately, it's up to you to decide whether this claim even matters to you and whether this feature is one that you're even going to use. Just don't go selling your 4080s with the expectation that a $549 GPU is going to 100% replace the RTX 4090 just yet. Now, before we get into our closing thoughts, just a quick note on power draw, thermal performance, and of course noise. Starting with power draw, we saw the 5070 average 250 watts under load in firm arc and around 223 watts in our gaming benchmarks. When compared to the 4070 Super, the 5070 drew 13.58% or about 40 watts more power under load and 7.43% or about 15 watts more during gaming. As for temps, the RTX 5070 hovered around 73 degrees Celsius while under load and about 66 degrees while under gaming. This was definitely warmer than the RTX 4070 Super under full GPU load, but the 5070 is drawing more power overall so this isn't terribly surprising. Now, as for noise levels, we recorded the RTX 5070 Founders Edition around 58.8 decibels, which is about the same level of quiet rainfall around Seattle most days. So pretty quiet overall, but it was still slightly louder than the Asus Prime RTX 5070 Ti and the RTX 4070 Super we've been comparing the 5070 to throughout this review. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of data, so where does it all leave us with the RTX 5070? Overall, the RTX 5070 falls into an interesting space. This GPU serves as the 50 series point of entry for raw 1440p performance above 60 frames per second and high visual fidelity. Not only that, the possibilities with multi-frame generation could actually make this GPU a solid upgrade. So what does this all mean for you today? The longer we look at the RTX 5070 and realistically the 50 series as a whole, the more we're convinced that the value of this GPU and the series as a whole is going to depend on what price you can actually get it for, what you're upgrading from, and whether or not the 50 series features like multi-frame generation or many of their encoding or streaming features are actually going to benefit you. So the biggest question is, will this GPU have the same staying power when it comes to AAA titles at 1440p? While we do see a growing implementation of ray tracing and path tracing in newer titles, this question may not be an issue for the gamer who isn't interested in AAA titles. If you see multi-frame generation as a must for unlocking your favorite game's potential, the RTX 5070 looks like an appealing buy if you're coming from an older platform. That is, if you can get one at MSRP. For me personally, I just have a hard time justifying that, just given how much you pay extra for such few frames and for how few folks will actually overclock, even with NVIDIA's one-button overclocking in their NVIDIA app. But if you're on the fence about multi-frame generation or many of the other features, or you're looking at raw performance as a target, the 5070 is releasing 2 days before the equally priced AMD Radeon RX 9070 and the ever so slightly more expensive RX 9070 XT. While we don't have an official comparison we can make just yet, it is looking like waiting is the smartest option right now. That is, unless you need to buy a GPU today, and if that's you, I wish you luck on getting your hands on one. And there you have it, guys. That is our initial review of the RTX 5070 and the last GPU in the initial 50 series launch. Again, we want to say thank you to NVIDIA for giving us the opportunity to check out the RTX 5070 Founders Edition, and for all the partners who sent us cards as well. And since we shared our thoughts with you, we want to know what you think. Did the RTX 5070 live up to the hype, or do the impending RX 9070 series releases have the 5070 heading for an upset? If you're thinking about upgrading to a 5070, what GPU are you upgrading from? And if you have to buy a GPU today, why this one? And what's driving that urgency? I'd love to know the answer to that one. Let me know down in the comments below. Now, while you're down there, make sure you slap that subscribe button, whip that like button, and ring that notification bell so you get a notification each and every time we post a video like this right here on Robeytech. And if you want to continue the conversation, maybe talk about whether this is the right GPU or whatever it is, head on over to our Discord server, discord.gg/Robeytech. It's an amazing place to meet other tech and PC enthusiasts who love to talk about these things. And you know what? You might just make a friend. Also, make sure you follow us on all the other socials at Robeytech, absolutely everywhere. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.